Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here as always with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. And again, another robust pregame, Jim, kind of involving some of the things that took place in our respective lives over the weekend. And I think we're going to talk about self-reflection today and this notion that as we get older, we do have a tendency, I think, to reflect on the past. And there are a couple of different ways and angles on how we reflect on the past. But I think self-reflection in the context of what's behind us as opposed to what might be in front of us. So Jim, bring us up to speed on how we arrived at the pregame. Maybe put it in the context of the framework.
Yeah, well, like we always do every week, we use our framework of these five areas of our life, and then the center is the most important part of the framework, and that's self hyphen. So every episode we do, we've created this library of self, and it starts with self awareness and just being self aware. So when I reflect on interactions I have with friends or just people in general, particularly if they're older or later on in life, they have a tendency to refer to the past as better than the future, and it turns out that that's a real thing. That's not a coincidence. That's what the neuroscience of what the human brain does over time. I used to refer to it as nostalgia or self-reflection, but so I found it fascinating. And the discussion we're going to have today is the differences between them. And then this word that I came across, I think it was a made-up word called declinism, which I never heard of. So I'll let you read the descriptions of that, and then, like you said, we'll kind of share that and how that applies in our interactions with the world, and even this past weekend, because we both had some, I think, um, experiences that are very refer to this way we see the past and the future.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was at the first Aylward Family Reunion, so talking about the past was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
and I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the
Mhm.
episode. But let me
Yeah,
read declinism because I think even though it's a made up word, it's a concept, and I think
yeah.
that I don't know that we're going to have as many facts in this one as we are going to have opinions because I think the way you look at the past and the way that you look at the future are
Yes,
opinions, right? They're and
absolutely.
and they can become pretty emotional depending on where we're situated. But
Yeah.
decline in you remember the past as better than it was and expect the future to be worse than it will likely be. Despite living in the most peaceful and prosperous time in history, many people believe things are getting worse. The 24-hour news cycle, with its reporting of overtly negative and violent events, might account for some of this effect. We could also look at the generally optimistic view of the future in the early 20th century as being shifted to a dystopian and apocalyptic expectation after the world wars and during the Cold War. The greatest tragedy of this bias may be that our collective expectation of decline may contribute to a real world self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah, and that's jam-packed.
Yeah, exactly. That's an episode. But wow, what jumped out there was really the news cycles, right? How much that influences us in terms of our worldview. It's a big part of our framework on our podcast, right? Our worldview
Mhm.
of how we see the world. And if you're watching headline news, whatever it is, whether it's the blue channel, the red channel, it's declinism. It's everything's getting worse, and that sells. That's not the news. That's marketing. That's an advertising machine that is producing content for us to be worried, stop what we're doing, and watch TV. And then before you know it, that's what we've programmed our minds to believe. The world's coming to an end, and it
You
turns out
know,
that's nothing new. It's always
yeah,
been. Yeah.
yeah. I think there's a couple things that strike me about that, Jim. One is that when we were kids, I mean, and again, we're reflecting on the past. I had three TV stations to choose.
Yep.
You
It's a
know,
good point.
I
Yep.
so I think that it's not only always been around, but it's never been as prolific as it is now
That's,
because
yep.
you almost can't look away today. You almost like you can
Yep.
try to, but you and I have talked a million times about the YouTube rabbit hole. And if you go down the YouTube
Yep.
rabbit hole, and I'm not picking on YouTube, it's any rabbit hole where news
Yeah.
is being proffered, is it fucks me up.
Yeah.
It makes me a little more negative. It makes me a little more pessimistic. It really does mess with your emotions. And I think it kind of makes me think that when we look at the past or we try to project the future, got to be a little careful because
Mhm.
you almost have to process, well, what are the sources I'm getting this material from? And are these really facts, or am I just listening to the opinions of others? And I think the biggest problem with the news right now is it's no longer really the news. It's really just the opinions of whomever might be behind the microphone. And I think those contribute to the negativity that might abound when we look back on things, or maybe more importantly, when we look forward as to
No, no, excellent point, Mark. Like you said, these it's not just that we had three channels and but there was some commonality, right? Because we had less choices, but these devices are with us 24/7. So I think it's a really important starting point to have this conversation of why it is different because we never had access to so much information. And but we have to remember this is not the news. These are entertainment channels that disguise themselves as news channels. They're not. The most of them are they're entertainment that looks like news, so people listen to it and feel like they have to be up to date. But I also don't think it's good for the soul, the human mind. If it's only sees negativity all the time on the screen, then pretty soon their interactions with the world are that. And I think we're both going to share our stories. When you get out and you start to talk to people, especially people in different generations, um, it's better maybe than it is, or how you choose to do it. But there's something that I use a quote that I've used, and I still often do. It goes, "We grow bitter or we grow better.
Mhm.
The default is bitter." And I'm going to add to it because I heard something recently. It was really interesting. It was similar to that. It was that this guy was talking about diseases and how important it is to get a scan of your body.
Mhm.
And it turns out that there's this really, really bad disease in our body that you can't see. So the only way you can get this reading is if you get a body scan, and um, and that's called bitterness. It's in your body, so you don't know you have it, but it's killing you. It's affecting the way it's affecting your health, your mental health, your physical health. And again, it was a visual about how bitterism, being bitter, uh, comes out in every part of your life, your physical life, and everything you do. How you interact with the world is a big part of it, and you don't know it unless you
Yeah.
take the time and you have this. Obviously, using this as a visual body scan, an MRI of your body to find this disease that's
Mhm.
eating you up from the inside out. I thought it was an interesting addition to the quote that I often use: "We grow bitter or we grow better. The default is bitter." It takes a lot of work not to be mad at the world, and gratitude is something that is intentional. And in the pregame, we talked about this, right? How did you? Um, I asked you what was your influence when you were growing up to choose to do that, because it is a choice. And I was interested in your answer. I've heard it before, but I think you just did a little deeper dive, especially over the weekend when you did the family reunion, because you could do some self reflection on your life and we know
Yeah.
what brings you to this moment now.
The mind over the weekend just was racing. It was racing in anticipation of what might be the reunion, and then
Mhm.
after the fact, reminiscing on all the interactions and the stories and the shoulda, woulda, couldas, and how come we're out of touch for so long, and so on and so forth. My dad, I told you, had 36 cousins on my dad's side,
Yeah,
so if everybody showed up with their kids, it probably would have been a couple hundred
yeah,
people there, but there were about 50. And my father was at the core of it. He's there. He's coming on 98 years old and the captain. He's at the center of the whole thing. I think the other thing that struck me in the pregame, Jim, and this happened during the reunion and after the reunion, some people, I think maybe it's young people, maybe it's just people in general, I don't know, but they have a tendency, we have a tendency to accept things at face value, I think sometimes. And when back to the three channels, the other thing about three channels is there was three guys that we could trust or hoped we could trust. Now there's like 3,000.
Yeah.
And I think anytime you move from a position of authority that's three people to 3,000, and I bet you it's a bigger number than 3,000. I'm
Mhm.
just using it as an example. You're going to sacrifice the quality of that communication, right?
Mhm. Well,
So
you dilute the messaging, that's for
you're
sure.
going to dilute the message and you're also going to be beholden to more
Mhm.
people. And not that
Mhm.
there weren't advertisers back then, there were. I mean, they were pushing cigarettes, they were pushing,
Yeah.
stuff that wasn't good for us as well. But I think just the sheer volume makes the quality go down and the noise go up,
Yeah.
So, but this idea of accepting anything at face value, we talked about that in the pregame, like I don't really care who the source is. I think investigating something that you're interested in, if you're not interested in it, obviously you don't have the time and energy to be interested in everything, but you got to pick your spots. If
Mhm.
you are interested, then I think it logically follows that you need to investigate further to either validate the position or the contrary position.
Mhm.
And I think that we're accepting too many things at face value. I'm not sure where
Mhm.
that belongs in the discussion, but it struck me.
Well, again, you'd mentioned that back then, I told myself I'd never do this, so I'm not doing this back then thing. But what I am saying, you did say something that I think is important to mention. That was you were an American first, and the political party was second.
Hmm.
So, and in some cases, you didn't know whether the reporter, I don't know, that's who was it? Walter Cronkite, I said.
Cronkite, yeah,
Yeah.
Cronkite.
Yeah. I don't, I can't remember whether he was a Republican or a Democrat. It didn't really matter. He was reporting the news. I think
Mhm.
he was trying to be at least as neutral as he could be. And it was about what was good for the country first. And that, to your point, has really changed with 24/7 news and all these different sources. But again, I want to bring this back to this declinism. And then as I did this deep dive, as I do, every week in preparation, I came across these two other terms, nostalgia, right? The past. And then the difference is, of course, when you put a self hyphen in front of anything, it changes the meaning. So let's break this down because I got a lot out of this. The difference between self-reminiscing. I'm sure you did some of that at your family reunion or party, and then also self-nostalgia because they are different and they often get interchanged. But I got um, uh, yeah, I have a different perspective of what my brain is doing when I'm self-reflecting from the past versus the future, and particularly when I'm interacting with people that I want to give a positive uh, future or outlook to, because I don't think it does any good to tell somebody in their 20s or their 30s or even their 40s how great it used to be. I think that's one of the worst things you can do is make them feel that they missed out on a good time. That's not true. There was always problems, there was always conflict. It was just a different conflict, and
Yeah, I
every
think
generation complains about the other one as not being as good as theirs. That's just what we do as humans.
yeah,
So.
it is. It is human nature to some extent. I think that, the difference that you've cited here with your definitions, nostalgia and reminiscing. So self-reminiscing and self-nostalgia, I think the most important distinction first is to say, recognize that reminiscing is an action and
Mhm.
nostalgia is an emotion. And
Yep.
I think that
Interesting.
because nostalgia is an emotion, when we become nostalgic, we remember things better than they were. I mean, it makes
Hmm.
me think of, the home runs I hit in Little League where they were 200 feet.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
reality, in my recollection, they were 300 feet,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
had more of them than I actually did.
Yeah. Well, like you said, there's many fish stories. The size of the fish grows every year,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
based on so. Yeah.
yeah.
But it
But
turns out that that's normal. I
it
think
is.
people.
It is
Yeah.
normal. I think the mistake that I make sometimes is, and even though I'm a huge fan of context, is we sometimes spend a little too much time looking at things without the proper context behind them. It's like
Hmm.
anything that happened in the past, it happened in the past. There were different conditions, there were different
Yes.
expectations, there were different
So important.
regulations, there were different cultures. All of these things, we look at things in the past that they're bad, like slavery or like war. And it's like, well, why did that happen? How long? did it go on, and when did it stop, and why did it stop? It doesn't really
Hmm.
matter what the issue is. I think the tendency, the human nature, when we reflect back,
Hmm.
whether we're reminiscing or being nostalgic, is are we actually viewing what happened in the context of what was, or are we putting it up on a pedestal as if it were today?
Yeah.
Because I think that interpretation is by definition, it's just wrong, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, let's read these and we're going to break these down because I think these definitions allow us to pontificate, which is something
Yeah.
that as we do more as we get older as well. So
Well, yeah. Do you want me to do them both, or you want me to
yeah, we'll
start?
do one at a time and then we'll just talk about the differences. Yeah. Yeah.
So, self-reminiscing is the cognitive act of deliberately recalling and reviewing your own past experiences. It's the mental process of pulling up autobiographical memories to examine them, piece them together, or simply tell a story to yourself or others about what you have been through. Uh, let me read self-nostalgia as well
Hmm.
because it'll be comparative. Self-nostalgia and self-reminiscing are closely related and often happen at the same time. They are fundamentally different psychological functions. The easiest way to separate them is to remember that reminiscing is an action while nostalgia is an emotion. Yeah, I think it's interesting that they're often they often happen at the same time. So we remember actual events, and then I think it's difficult, at least for me, to not attach some level emotion to those events.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had a visitor this past weekend and it's a family friend. So I know his family very well. Um, he's 20, yeah, like 22, maybe 23 years old, or just he's graduating from college. So he's entering the world. And like everybody, when they're graduating from college, trying to figure out, what are you going to do the rest of your life? What do you want to be when you grow up? And of course, right now with what's going on in the world, particularly with AI, this generation of college graduates feel like they don't have internships, they don't have the same opportunities, and so we had a conversation a few months ago, and I said, hey, I happen to think it's one of the most exciting times ever to be alive with AI. Maybe where you're at, or I said, why don't you get out of your environment and come to California, hang out for the weekend, and it'd just be a good way to maybe get a different perspective. So I have to say, I was so uh, inspired by this young mind. And a quick background, and then again, I also want you to share your stories. But this is he's a COVID kid, right? There is a difference between his generation and what they experienced at his age, which means a COVID kid. What's the definition of a COVID kid? It means he wiped out most of his high school experience, and he also wiped out probably his freshman year of college experience. Those kids, I call it a shit sandwich. They really did. They got uh, you talk about things not being the same, the past. They didn't, all the stories about how great it was in their senior year and their first year of college, they didn't get to experience that. Now,
Mhm.
we can frame that as a really bad thing, but I see this as his superpower because he's had this experience that will serve us as a society, as a country, very well because he saw probably the worst of how things can go during a very, let's just say, contentious time period of politics, race, and other things. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but I'll give you just again a quick background. He has a wonderful grandmother, very, very bright. I know her well. A mom, loving mother and father, also very smart, very educated, and two sisters, same thing, went on and done good things. Um, and so that I mentioned that because he's grown up in a time like all of us that it's an heightened position or his exposure of how he interacts with the world at that young age obviously is affected by his environment and those people around him. But somehow he's been able to develop his this perspective of life that I couldn't be more impressed. One, he knew his history. So often when you speak to somebody young, they don't have context in terms of human history, and he knew his history. Now, of course, I said I don't give advice. That's my thing now, right? I said I don't give advice. I'll share a perspective. It may or may not apply to your life. I'll share my life lived experiences. They may or may not apply to your life. So I'm very conscious of not giving advice, especially in the context of nostalgia, how great it used to be when I was growing up. And I found that I probably got as much out of it that he did, because back to your point, Mark, about when you start to you catalog your life, or in chronological order, you you have to tell your story as fast as you can, so he could gain something from that experience. And these different, I grew up in a very different place at a very different time with a very different background, and I'll share more of it. But I have to say, sometimes the teacher learns more than the student. Um,
Hmm.
I walked away very optimistic about the future of um, this group of people that experience some really difficult things, that can do some good things with these experiences if they're given, and I'll say permission, because when you're young, you said it, Mark, they don't know, right? Their minds, they're still trying to create what is right from wrong, and they're trying to understand even authority, what it means. And that's the difference between becoming a man and taking a position of conviction in what he believes in versus maybe a political environment and so on. But there's a mouthful there, but run with that for me if you could, because I think you had a
I
similar
think
experience.
yeah, there's a lot of topics there. I think one of the things that we talked about kind of stems from that, which is this whole who are the people that influenced your life when you were growing
Hmm.
up? And now where we
Yeah.
are who are the people that we might be able to influence with? And I love the distinction between observations and advice or perspective and advice.
Hmm.
I think that's really helpful to get somebody to kind of listen, more likely to listen to my observations than you are my advice, right? And I think of the time when I was 16 or 17, I think, and I was talking to my dad about my faith and how I was
Hmm.
struggling with us God in the sky and the virgin birth
Hmm.
and miracles. And I'm like, Dad, I don't know if I buy this. And I kind of
And you're
thought,
how about what age, Mark?
I think it was 16, 17, something like
Yeah.
that. I had not yet gone to college, so I was
Yeah.
still in high school. And
Uh-huh.
I don't know why I brought it up, but I got a completely surprise response. And I'm very grateful for it because I think it shaped me in some ways. And that was, Mark, question everything.
Yeah.
That's how you learn. And I
Yeah.
think that if I was to make an observation about a seminal moment in my life, that was definitely one of them because I became the guy who did question everything and almost to a fault sometimes because you can take it too far.
Hmm.
At some point you have to develop a set of beliefs and a set of values, but you know, I don't really take much at face value. And it's not because I don't trust people. I think I do. I think my
Hmm.
default is to be trusting and to be open and vulnerable. But,
Hmm.
I think I look around and when I talk to people today with whom I disagree, particularly, they're stuck in positions that I don't believe are supported by data. They're stuck in positions that are supported by emotion. And
Hmm.
although we all are entitled to our emotions, when we start to take positions based on them and not investigate, I think that we're not going to accomplish the things we want to. We're not going to make the progress we could if
Hmm.
we
Yeah,
continue
yeah,
along
Mark.
the
But
lines
you'd
of
mentioned somebody about the same age as this my guest over the weekend, and I was of course I know this person, but you also, that was your father, right? So that's how you really got your kind of your basis of how you're going to always learn and question things. So that was at the core. But you also shared with me somebody else came into your life. This is what I refer to as the secondary male role model or figure that really shapes a young man's life. I'm a big believer in that. We both had good fathers, but it was that secondary male figure that really shaped my life as my work ethic and other things. I had a neighbor that was really important to me. Um, but yeah, share with me about, because again, the context is this: you're 1 year out of college, or you're in the your 20s, right? You're in your 20s. You're still trying to figure the world out, and then who helped you shape that? Um, that outlook, or how you go about interacting with the world.
Well, he might be listening. Paul was my business mentor, and I think the context of that was I was really seeking, what I was going to sink my teeth into because I was made aware that I was going to be a father. And so I all of a sudden started taking the world a lot more seriously. And I don't think I was alone. I think 26, 27 is kind of the time when you either become a man or you remain a
Yeah.
child. And it could be 25, could be 30, but I
Mhm.
don't think men
Yeah.
develop,
But
boys
what
don't
is it that he
develop.
said that stays
Well,
with you?
he was an entrepreneur. And
Right.
my father worked for the same company his whole
Oh, I
career.
see. So it's a different perspective of
Totally different perspective.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
it began he cracked open my cranium to the possibility of being able to create something yourself
Hmm.
and not to have to depend on a large corporation or another company or another
Yeah.
boss. Even though he was my boss, he was my mentor.
Hmm.
Basically, one day after working for him for a little while, he said, "Do you want to start a consulting firm?" I said, "Well, tell me what a consulting firm is, and I'll give you an answer."
But he believed in you enough to want to start a company with you. He
He
saw the
did.
talent in
He
you. Yeah.
did. Yeah,
Well, it's
God bless
also
him.
somebody that believed in you, right? It's
Oh
not
yeah.
just,
Yeah,
it was both.
he was an excellent observation guy with regard to character and
Yeah.
he
He still
figured
is.
out,
I know, I know him as a
yeah,
great guy.
yeah.
And
He
the
built and
character
sold
is
he
describes, yeah.
he built and sold a bunch of companies and I just, that was my first introduction to being an entrepreneur and I've remained one my entire life. And I remember Jim telling my dad that I was going to start my own company after
Hmm.
Paul sold the company we had. And he thought I was insane, and it
Hmm.
was like, it was this guy loves me and knows me, but he has no experience in this area.
Yeah.
Never. He always worked for someone else. So even
Hmm.
though Paul, I was pretty well formulated as a man in terms of my values and stuff, but this perspective on business was entirely contrary to anything I'd ever said before or heard
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I want to share this last part because what you said just reminded me of something. So remember, he's only 22 years old. So he's going through his life and you can catalog it based just on the timeline. And then he ended up taking care of his grandfather, which was interesting for a period of time. I guess he was in between school or whatever. So his grandfather that he never really knew, he was not in his life, came into the picture and he had dementia or was really in bad shape. So he was the one asked to be like his caregiver for this period, the final, I think, maybe year, 6 months of his life. Fascinating story, just
Mm,
in general, because he's entered this life. And so he was uh, sharing with me how much that he was learning from this man really with dementia saying these things. It was
mhm,
fascinating for these reasons because apparently, remember, his cognitive ability is not there. So when that happens, the human mind, when it has no filter left, it says things as not as they were maybe, but as they were remembered of
mhm,
their life. And so he
mhm.
would spurt these things out. And this, 20-year-old kid at the time's like trying to figure this out. But what he said to me, I'll never forget, and that was really cool. He went on to say that he said, but my real grandfather was Joe, and that was his grandmother's husband, great guy. And he was the calm guy. He was the wisdom. He was the one there. Complete opposites. And that he had passed, I think, a year or two ago now, and that really was who he is. That this young man, he was modeling to be like his real grandfather, Joe. And
Mm.
and I just thought that was really cool because I knew Joe. He was just the wise guy, the calm guy, really nice and always there, but never too loud, never. And so it goes. I think it's an example of that secondary male figure that can influence a young man for the rest of his life. That really, even though
Yeah, that's
he's not
great.
here, he's still there, and that really is probably his compass of what a man is. And then of
Well,
course we went into that. So.
yeah, it does kind of emphasize the point that, it's worth investigating and investigating can involve just listening to other people with different opinions on things and different perspectives on things. But, and not, again, not to be the old guy. I'm actually going to be the young guy in this finish, but I've always wandered towards older people, wondering how they got where they are. And I think that that level of investigation and the luck that this young man had to have that guy around, you
Yeah.
know, that's wise on its own, you know. So if I was to
In the
leave,
middle of him trying to understand the world,
mhm,
that was the one person he went to get maybe, I don't know, truth. Maybe
yeah,
it was Joe had a very nice calmness about him. And he
yeah,
was very, I believe he was an engineer, very successful in his own time. But he was at that final stage in his life where he had a lot of wisdom. But I think it was really more of his presence and his calmness that
yeah.
that
Calmness
really
is calmness
influenced
is
him. Yeah,
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 calmness is usually where integrity lies, and loudness is usually where,
and wisdom,
yeah,
right?
wisdom as well. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that I'll leave everybody with this notion of, you know, if you feel strongly about something, don't be shy about investigating it. And I think without proper
yeah.
context, things are just opinions.
Yeah, and then I'll leave it with this. If you have an opportunity to spend time with somebody that's trying to understand the world, um, sometime I think it was just not having any distractions, cell phones, and just giving him time. We just hung out, right? It was a short period of time, but we went out to dinner, we went running, we just talked, and
Mhm.
and you never know the benefit that you'll get from it. That's really what I'm saying. I think I got more out of it than he did.
Yeah,
I can't
yeah,
speak for him, but I had a chance to self reflect, to reminisce about my own life because he was asking questions. I would just share stories and then reflect on how those stories affected my life. And yeah, some nostalgia, of course. You're gonna share stories. So it was cool. It was a
yeah.
wonderful
No,
experience.
I think when you teach others or you try to teach others, you can't help but look in the mirror while you're doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Good stuff, Jim.
All right, Mark.
Thanks, man.
Until next week.